So, take a look at the bottom of page 9. He's actually talking about, the connection between eating bread and being nourished, or the secret power of bread, nourishing us, or why anything is nourishing rather than not. And he says at the bottom of that page, he says the consequence, that is, that this particular bread will be, or this particular substance will be nourishing to me, the consequence seems nowise necessary. At least it must be acknowledged that there is here a consequence drawn by the mind, that there is a certain step taken, a process of thought, and an inference which wants to be explained. These two propositions are far from being the same. I have found that such an object has always been attended with such an effect, and I foresee that other objects, which are in appearance similar, will be attended by similar effects. I shall allow, if you please, that the one proposition may justly be inferred from the other. I know, in fact, that it always is inferred. But if you insist that the inference is made by a chain of reasoning, I desire you to produce that reasoning. That is, that our notion of cause and effect is not arrived at by reasoning at all. In fact, it's not a rational concept. It's not a concept that's actually based on any intellectual principle, any rational principle at all. Well, it may be based on another principle, which may be a principle of human nature. He says on page 14, the beginning of the second paragraph, this principle is custom or habit. For wherever the repetition of any particular act or operation produces a propensity to renew the same act or operation without being impelled by any reasoning or process of understanding, we always say that this propensity is the effect of custom. By employing that word, we pretend not to have given the ultimate reason of such a propensity. We only point out a principle of human nature, which is universally acknowledged and which is well known by its effects. And then he says in the next paragraph on page 14, custom then is the great guide of human life. It is that principle alone which renders our experience useful to us and makes us expect for the future a similar train of events with those which have appeared in the past. Without the influence of custom, we should be entirely ignorant of every matter of fact beyond what is immediately present to the memory and senses. And below that on page 14 he mentions history, which is very interesting. If you think about it, history is about matters of fact, or largely part of history at least is about matters of fact, none of which obviously we can experience directly if it gets too far in the past, all of which we think we know something about, matters of fact, like who assassinated Caesar or something like that. That was Brutus. I'm Cassius. Boy. But we know those things because we have direct experiences of reading or seeing a portrayal or watching the Shakespeare play. But we believe that those direct experiences were somehow connected up by chains of causes and effects by past matters of fact. And, so we really do rely, and as he says, babies do this. They learn not to touch a flame or what's associated with a hot surface because they expect that the future will be like the past. But when we think about it, this principle of cause and effect is entirely derived from habit and custom, and as is so often the case with Hume, it's a vital principle that we use to make our ideas useful so we can get around in the world. And he talks a little bit about what seems like a pre-established harmony between nature and our own thinking in this respect. However, this principle is a principle of human nature. It's not a principle of the world. That is, it's not something that is actually presented to us in our experience. That is, that the future will resemble the past, or especially that one thing causes another. These principles are subjective principles. They're principles of our nature, of our minds, of our way of experiencing, but they are not principles of the world. So, cause and effect, or the whole idea of causality, is, in a way, is affirmed by Hume as being the most important thing in the world, because we couldn't get along without it, because the whole idea of cause and effect rests ultimately on our belief that the future will resemble the past, which in a way is just saying that the world around us is a fundamentally orderly place, that things don't just happen, they happen with some degree of predictability and order. So on the one hand, we absolutely need this principle of cause and effect. We couldn't get along without it. On the other hand, it's a subjective principle. It's something that we supply to the world rather than a principle that we derive from our experience of the world. Which is to say, on the one hand, it's indispensable. On the other hand, it's completely unfounded and is kind of a fiction. So, causality is a metaphysical concept. That is a concept that we use to get around the world, and we assume as part of the deep structure of the world. It's like we think that substances or beings are part of the structure of the world. We think that cause and effect relationships are part of the structure of the world. However, from an empiricist standpoint, that assumption of them being part of the world is entirely unfounded, because we don't actually have experience of causes, one thing causing another, any more, Locke would say, than we have an experience of a substance. It's the I know not what. On the other hand, they both acknowledge that as far as getting around in the world, substances and causes are quite necessary, but we should never forget where they come from. And as we'll see, this criticism of metaphysics, limits of metaphysics, is kind of a challenge to Kant, and really inspires a lot of what he does.